Hey, what is up guys? So if you have seen Star Wars Rogue One by now, clearly you want to know all about the great Easter eggs that are in the movie. Now obviously with that in mind, you should know that this video is going to be chock full of spoilers. So let's jump into all the Easter eggs in Rogue One. So Star Wars is famous for its opening crawl, and Star Wars Rogue One is the first movie not to feature it. Instead, it goes from the normal, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, straight to the movie. And like every Star Wars movie, it opens up in space. Except the difference is every other Star Wars movie ends up panning onto a planet, this one actually opens up with the planet in full view. The ship we see at the start of the movie that is used by Krennic is the Delta Class T-3C, which is a transport ship used by the Empire. This is the shuttle that predates the T-4A, which made its first appearance in Star Wars Return of the Jedi. And speaking of Krennic, his uniform is very reminiscent of that of Grand Admiral Thrawn. But this uniform was of course first seen in Star Wars A New Hope, worn by Colonel Wolf Yarlin. And while we're on the topic of Krennic, let's talk about his special elite troopers called the Death Troopers, who sport black armor. These are most closely related to the Death Troopers in Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast the video game. Next up, let's talk about Mads Mikkelsen's character, who is of course Galen. This name might be paying tribute to Galen Marek, aka Starkiller from Star Wars The Force Unleashed. And of course, one of the more important characters in Rogue One is Saw Gerrera. And this is not the first time the character has appeared in Star Wars. As the Clone Wars were actually kept as part of the continuity by Disney, he was actually in Star Wars The Clone Wars, the animated series. And speaking of Gerrera, he was not actually even developed with the Clone Wars in mind. George Lucas actually came up with the character while producing the live-action TV series Star Wars Underground. Now obviously in the movie, Lyra, the mother of Jay Erso, ends up getting killed, but before that happens, she ends up giving Jay a Kyber crystal necklace. Now of course this is central to the movie and Star Wars itself, as the Kyber crystals are used to power weapons, such as lightsabers and of course the Death Star. And speaking of the beginning of the movie, everybody remembers in Star Wars A New Hope when Luke Skywalker pours out blue milk. In the opening act of the movie, we actually see Lyra grabbing all sorts of things, and we see that blue milk is one of them. The reprogrammed Imperial droid K2SO, the KY series security droid, is the Imperial Enforcement droid, but this is actually not his first appearance in the brand new Disney Star Wars canon, as these droids made their first canonical appearance in the video game Star Wars Commander, available on mobile phones. Of course, one of the most important planets in Star Wars lore is Yavin 4. And throughout the film, a couple of times as the ships are arriving and taking off, you will see a scene very reminiscent of the one in A New Hope. And speaking of the rebels, they actually used the Great Temple of the Massassi, who were an ancient alien species that was actually killed off by the Sith thousands of years ago before the events of Star Wars Rogue One. And speaking of the rebels on Yavin 4, you will undoubtedly be able to identify quite a few of them if you know your Star Wars lore. The first being Mon Mothma, who is of course played by the same character that played her in Star Wars Episode 3, but that scene was inevitably cut from the final release. But in the original trilogy, Mon Mothma does not make her first appearance till Return of the Jedi. The second familiar face is going to be General Jan Dodonna, who leads the attack on the Death Star in Star Wars A New Hope. And last up is of course going to be Bail Organa, who is of course played by Jimmy Smits, who of course made his first appearance in the prequels, and is the adoptive father of Princess Leia. He of course ends up being on Alderaan when the planet is destroyed. But before Bail Organa leaves for Alderaan, Mon Mothma actually suggests that he reaches out to a Jedi friend. The Jedi in question is of course a longtime friend of Bail Organa and the Rebel Alliance, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is currently on Tatooine looking over Luke Skywalker. And while Jay and Cassian are leaving on their mission to find Saw Gerrera, we get a quick cameo of C-3PO and R2-D2 on Yavin 4. There is also an unconfirmed Easter egg that we really won't know till we can get a high definition version of the movie, but it is reported that C-110P, aka Chopper from Star Wars Rebels, is also seen at the Yavin 4 base. And speaking of the Rebels crew, there's a clear mention of their involvement in the Rebels TV show. During a calm transition across the Yavin 4 base, there is a mention to summon General Syndulla. General Syndulla was actually a part of the Clone Wars animated series, and his daughter Hera Syndulla is a main character on Rebels. The ship that is used by the Rebels throughout the movie, specifically the one in command by Cassian, is the UT-60D gunship. This is the first appearance of the ship on screen. Next up, during the giant climactic battle over Scarif, if you have a really sharp eye, you might be able to catch the Corellia VCX-100 light freighter. This is the same class of ship as the Ghost used by the Rebels in Star Wars Rebels, and one is to assume that they joined in this battle. Now during that same climactic battle, we actually see a ship run by the Rebellion push a Star Destroyer into another Star Destroyer. This ship is called the Hammerhead Corvette. It is inspired by the ships seen in Knights of the Old Republic. Now during this same battle, there are quite a few mentions of different fighter squadrons. The first one is going to be the Blue Squadron, which is first mentioned in the giant Star Wars comics crossover, Vader Down. And of course the other two squadrons are the Red Squadron and Gold Squadron, which were first seen in Star Wars A New Hope during the Battle of Yavin. And like in that movie, Red Squadron is made up of X-Wings, while the Gold Squadron is made up of Y-Wings. And speaking of the Red and Gold Squadrons, let's quickly talk about two characters. Rogue One actually uses stock footage of both of these characters, who of course died during the attack of the Death Star. They are fully involved in the final battle above Scarif. And in this film, we find out why Luke Skywalker has the call sign of Red 5, because Red 5 is actually killed during the Battle of Scarif, so that call sign is freed up. And during the Battle of Scarif, you can also notably tell two familiar Star Wars ships, the EF-76 Nebulon B, which first appeared in Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, and of course the GR-75 medium transport, which also appeared first during the Battle of Hoth. Now obviously the big weapons that the Rebels are trying to stop is of course the Death Star from being built. Now of course the first mention of the Death Star is during Star Wars Attack of the Clones, where Count Dooku is discussing the plans for it. And the next time we see it is during its construction at the end of Revenge of the Sith. And finally, after all of these years of wondering how exactly the Empire could overlook such a tiny weakness in the Death Star, such as one tiny exhaust port, we actually learned that the character of Galen Erso is the one that put it there in secret. He hid this weakness in of course the plans that were stolen by the Rebels. Now of course a major character that has a substantial role in Star Wars Rogue One is Grand Moff Tarkin, and he is brought back entirely through the use of CG, as the actor who played him, Peter Cushing, died well over a decade ago. Now of course another major character that appears in this is the one and only Darth Vader, and of course his look is very different than the ones we're used to, as it's more in line and almost perfectly recreated from Star Wars A New Hope, which of course includes a slightly different chest plate and of course the red lenses on his helmet. Now of course his armor would go on to look darker and more polished in future movies. This is why of course he looks slightly different in Star Wars A New Hope. And of course once again Darth Vader is voiced by the one and only James Earl Jones. In the suit though, it is the actor Spencer Wilding, who has previously appeared in Disney's own Guardians of the Galaxy. And also, as we see in this movie, Darth Vader actually has a castle now on Mustafar. Now Darth Vader was actually supposed to have a castle back in The Empire Strikes Back, but was removed due to time and budgeting reasons. And also in the old Star Wars Legends comics, Darth Vader actually has a castle on Coruscant. Now of course the planet Mustafar was used because that is where Anakin became Darth Vader, and it's something familiar for fans. And of course the first time we see Darth Vader in Rogue One is on Mustafar, and we see that he is actually being healed in a Bacta tank. Previously we saw Luke Skywalker in Empire Strikes Back, of course also in a Bacta tank after his encounter. Now of course we all know that the most famous fighter that the Empire uses is the TIE Fighter. This movie happens to have the first and only appearance of the TIE Striker. Now of course when we see Darth Vader actually show up in Rogue One during the Battle of Scarif, he is in the Star Destroyer Devastator. This is of course the first Star Destroyer we see as Star Wars A New Hope opens up. Now there are two very unexpected characters that make a very small cameo on the planet of Jeddah. Jay Erso ends up bumping shoulder to shoulder with Ponda Boba and Cornelius Evazan, who of course make an appearance in Star Wars A New Hope and pick a fight with Luke Skywalker. Now while talking about Jeddah, this is actually one of the most important moons in Star Wars history, as it is actually the home to one of the first civilizations in known existence to study the ancient energy that is the Force. And throughout the film we can actually see artifacts and even giant statues of Jedi all around the planet. And this is of course why the Empire is here to harvest all the Kyber crystals. Now of course two characters that are located on Jeddah are known as the Guardians of the Wills, and they are known as the Protectors of the Temple of Wills on Jeddah. This is of course a sacred temple to the Jedi and those that study the Force. Now the Temple of the Wills actually gets its name back all the way to the original script for Star Wars A New Hope, when the film was originally called Star Wars: The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, as taken from the Journal of the Wills. And the Church of the Wills actually has a direct connection to Star Wars The Force Awakens, as the character who was played by Max von Sydow, who dies at the hands of Kylo Ren, is a member of this church. Now when we are first introduced to the people working with Saw Gerrera, his partisans can actually be seen playing the game of Dejarik, which was of course first seen in Star Wars A New Hope. Now during the infiltration of the Citadel, the droid K2SO almost manages to deliver the line, "I have a bad feeling about this," before Cassian tells him to shut up. And last but not least, the Easter egg to take us home. Now of course the final scene in the movie is all a lead up to the point where Princess Leia gets the stolen plans, and we see the very same ship from the opening of Star Wars A New Hope, the CR-90, which obviously places the ending of Star Wars Rogue One just minutes before the opening of Star Wars A New Hope. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video all about the Easter eggs in Star Wars Rogue One. If you did, make sure you hit that like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.